Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Thursday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb, and I can't imagine what we'll be talking about today. Maybe the first round of the 2025 NBA draft and the New Orleans Pelicans taking a huge swing on two high upside players, but with a lot of risk involved as well, particularly when you consider the assets that the Pelicans had to give up to get into this position. All right, so we're going to start by talking about the big move that Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver made in the first round. The New Orleans Pelicans had the number 23 pick after they took the number 7 pick, and they obviously have the number 40 pick in today's second round. The Pelicans sent that number 23 pick and a number 20 and a 2026 first rounder to the Atlanta Hawks for the 13 pick, which they used to take Derik Queen. The 2026 pick is the better of their own or that of the Milwaukee Bucks. So whomever has the better pick between the New Orleans Pelicans next season and the Milwaukee Bucks will get that pick will go to the Atlanta Hawks. If Giannis, there are a couple of things that obviously you're concerned about. Number one, the Bucks are a compromised team because Damian Lillard is out for most or all of next season with that torn Achilles. You still have, though the chances seem much smaller now, but you still have the possibility that Giannis Antetokounmpo could be traded. And if that's the case, giving up control of the Bucks' fully protected 2026 first round pick in order to move up 10 spots in this draft could end up being an ultimately franchise ruining decision. Because if the New Orleans Pelicans, who figure to be somewhere between 7 and 14 in the Western Conference next year, I think we can all see the top 6 as it is. We're talking about teams like Minnesota, obviously, Oklahoma City, the defending champions, Houston, obviously. We're expecting, a San Antonio maybe to be in that group. You're talking about Denver, of course, in that mix. And, the Lakers or the Clippers should be in there as well in your top 6. But that also extends to about 8 now. We're talking about 8 legitimate playoff teams, right? So the Pelicans are more likely in that 9 to 14 group. I think you'd have to bet that the Jazz are most likely still the worst team in the Western Conference. The Suns might be right ahead of them, but we'll see what moves the Suns make after their weird draft. But the Pelicans likely in that 9 through 13 group. And if you don't make the playoffs, if the Bucks don't make the playoffs, and only one of those teams has to be bad, mind you, for that pick to be a high lottery pick for the Hawks, the Pelicans could miss out in a draft that I think next year has higher top end talent than this year's draft. And if you're ultimately talking about a Pelicans team that is going to enter a rebuild, if they decide this year that the Zion Williamson experiment, it's time to end it. It's time to rebuild this team around these 2 young players that you took this season. You are missing the opportunity now to add a third high-level young player to this mix. So potentially, if this does not work, and we'll get into this a little more, but if this does not work just off the surface, you end up again, which in a weird place for the Pelicans, which is 2 teams within your team on 2 different timelines. You have the core of Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones on one timeline. And then you have this group now of Yves Missi, Antonio Reeves, Jeremiah Fears, Derik Queen on another timeline. And put Jose Alvarado in that first group too. So you have 2 groups on these different timelines. One needing to be a contender today to prove their value. The other that won't likely to yield high dividends for 2 to 3 years. If this does not work, one of these 2 groups is gone probably after this season. So you really only have 1 year to show that this is a significantly correct move. It can't just be kind of right. it has to pan out. The Pelicans have to hit a home run here. So, the criticism has been very heavy on the decision by Dumars and Weaver. You could go to a guy like Bill Simmons, who said, this is one of the 5 dumbest trades of this decade. He said he was left speechless and he couldn't believe it until he realized that it was Joe Dumars. This is where the criticism, when you talk about the hiring of Joe Dumars, comes in, is he's always been, and so is Troy Weaver. They've always been executives who've taken big swings in the draft, always trading within drafts, always looking for their player. And Dumars reiterated that last night. They identified Derik Queen. They felt like he was going to be a foundational piece, to quote Joe Dumars, and they went and got him. They targeted Derik Queen. The rumors were true. All the draft buzz that the Pelicans loved Derik Queen. He was one of their earliest workouts. That was all true. And they paid their price to get him. But when you look at the draft grades today, they are heavily weighted towards fears. Everybody loves the fears pick. Everybody questions the Queen pick. Not only because of the things we'll talk about when we isolate and just break down Derik Queen, but because of the price that you paid to get him. It remains to be seen, certainly. But I think in particular, you didn't address the biggest needs you had anymore coming into the draft. That is not to besmirch the talent of these two players. They are both highly talented players. They are both very young. Here's one of the youngest players, obviously, in this draft class, with the Queen not that much older than him. Both of these guys have a lot of risk. And defensively, they're both going to struggle. These are not particularly big players. They're not. Queen is not a particularly fast player defensively, not a great shot blocker, those types of things. So they have to make the offensive adjustment first. They have to be effective offensive players first. You got playmaking and scoring when you got Jordan Poole, when you got Saddiq Bey. But entering day 2 of this draft now, the New Orleans Pelicans still have not addressed interior defense, which means they're going to have to spend money in the free agent market on a center, and there are centers available. And we'll get into that next week after the draft is settled, and we can kind of figure that out. But next week, we'll start getting into the free agency again and seeing what's available for the New Orleans Pelicans. And we'll talk about the 40th pick a little bit later as well, but you are still at a severe disadvantage when it comes to interior toughness, rebounding, and defense. So the Pelicans have work to do while making this incredible bet. Again, the consensus has been that you took 2 highly talented players, but you also took 2 players with extreme boom or bust potential as well. These are 2 of the most likely, if you don't handle this right, if you don't handle this correctly, these are 2 of the more likely players to bust or to make their way in the NBA with their second team than the Pelicans if the Pelicans don't get this right. If the Pelicans did not put their faith in the right 2 players, or they are not setting them up to succeed by dealing with their coaching situation, by dealing with their player development situation, this could get bad for the Pelicans, for these players, and ultimately for the fans. Again, it's not to besmirch these 2 young men, but the Latin phrase of caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, certainly applies in this situation. Not because the product themselves are defective, but the buyer has to be sure that they can handle what they just purchased. Are the New Orleans Pelicans prepared to do what it takes to create a successful environment for both Jeremiah Fears and Derik Queen? That remains to be seen. Let's talk about these young players now. Jeremiah Fears, taken with the 7th pick, 6'2", 6'3", out of Oklahoma, a dynamic scorer, a lot of skill there, handling the basketball, ability to get to the rim, ability to finish, knock down free throws, a gives you a scorer and a playmaker at the point guard position. Something the Pelicans have really been looking for, is particularly needing leadership at that position. If you're taking, before we get deeper into the skill set, I think when you look at Fears, who came into this draft saying, I'm the best player in this class. I want to embrace the opportunity. I want to lead. I want this to be my team. I want to win. I want to do great things. Great. Okay, I'm excited. That makes me excited. You know, Fears was not my number one choice in this position. You know that I preferred Kaman Malawak, who went to the Phoenix Suns, but Fears was one of the three players outside of Malawak that I thought certainly could fit in New Orleans. So you've gotten somebody with skills, even with the rough edges around his game, even with the things that he does not particularly do well at this stage, like knocking down a three-pointer, which he did at less than 30%, less than 29%, 28.4%. So that was a horrendous shooting number. Also, his high number of turnovers, 116 turnovers last season, led the nation. He has to get better at that. And when you think about who he's playing for in Willie Green, the two weakest parts of his game are his turnovers and his defense. Also, you have to find a way to make shots. You look at this today. He's a little bit taller than Jose Alvarado, but not as good taking care of the basketball. You'd say he's not as good defensively today and not as good a shooter. Jordan Poole will likely be your starting point guard on day one while DeJounte Murray gets better. Because if you're taking a starting lineup today, you're saying, you know, and again, it's incomplete as we haven't seen what they do in free agency. But if you're taking the current players on the roster and who's healthy, you figure on day one, if everybody's back except for DeJounte, you are starting Jordan Poole at the point, Herb Jones at the 2, Trey Murphy at the 3, Zion Williamson at the 4, and Yves Missi at the 5. And if that's the case, when you look at the second unit, you got to find minutes for Derik Queen to play the 4 most likely at 6'9". Some center as well. Obviously, you also have Saddiq Bey in that forward rotation. You still have Brandon Boston on the roster in that rotation. You still have Jose Alvarado getting minutes. So Jeremiah Fears is going to be fighting with that second unit. We're already 10 players in. And we haven't talked about Carlo Makovich. We haven't talked about Antonio Reeves. So Jeremiah Fears, there has to be a plan for him to get consistent minutes and opportunities. Because the truth of the matter is the Pelicans are not contending for an NBA championship this season. Can they make the playoffs? Sure, they can make the playoffs. But they're not a championship contender. So what's the more important thing? For the long-term health of this franchise, they have to get Fears on the path to being their starting point guard. For the short term, can you afford to play him extended minutes? And can Willie Green get the most out of this young man on a night-to-night basis? How many nights will he spend in Birmingham trying to get his game together and getting the opportunity to run a team? Because I think the best thing for him in the short term is to not start him, but with that second unit, you have to allow him to play with at least one bigger guard because defensively he's going to struggle. So you can't play a double small backcourt with Fears and Jose. If you start Fears and you put Poole at the 2, Trey at the 3, Zion at the 4, Missi at the 5 right now, if that's your starting group and you bring in Herb Jones as your 6th man, you still have a balance issue with your second unit because where's your perimeter scoring going to come from? Right? You're counting on a Saddiq Bey or Brandon Boston in that case to be your scoring off the bench. And how confident are you in that with Brandon Boston again and Saddiq Bey, both of those guys coming off of injury? Though I really like Saddiq Bey and what he brings to the table, you're still wondering if he's going to be the kind of player that he was before he got hurt. You have in Fears a guy who is creative with the basketball, who's dynamic with the basketball, who wants to be a star. But can you put him in situations to win his minutes? Can you put him in situations to thrive and to be encouraged by what he's doing on the court and not lose a young man early who is used to having the basketball in his hands and used to being a high usage player and getting the shots that he wants and creating for others? The Pelicans have had those kinds of players in Zion Williamson, but the most of the players that they've drafted have been good players on their teams, but not focal points. Yves Missi was not a focal point at Baylor. Trey Murphy was not the best player on his Virginia team, though he ascended up the ranks as a prospect. He was not the leader of that Virginia team. Herb Jones was the best player on his Bama team, SEC Player of the Year, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, but Herb was not the scoring fulcrum of that Alabama team. Both Fears and Queen have come off seasons where they were the guy on teams that didn't have a lot of scoring besides them. They got to be the hubs of their offense. They got to be the focal points. How do they adjust in a Pelican system that has struggled to create individual opportunities for players, particularly with this young man? The strengths in particular for Fears, again, his dynamic ability with the basketball in his hands. I think the Kyrie Irving comparisons are a bit much and they're not fair. Kyrie was clearly a better shooter than Fears, a little bit more built physically and developed physically than Fears, showed more dominance in college in fewer games than Fears. But if you're getting a version, if you're getting something close to the kind of offensive impact that a Kyrie Irving has had over his career, then that's a win for the Pelicans. Obviously, his weaknesses are his size, his lack of strength, his lack of defensive ability. He's going to get bigger. He's going to have to get bigger real fast. He's going to have to work out this offseason and put on muscle to be able to compete in the NBA. And he needs to work on that jumper, particularly in catch and shoot situations all off season long, because more of his shots will come in catch and shoot than they will off the dribble now. So I think absolutely for a young man, you have to be encouraged by the transition he made from high school to college, especially after reclassifying and moving up and being one of the youngest players in college basketball. Now is one of the youngest players in the NBA. A lot of room to improve, a lot of optimism in his ability to improve really quickly. The word before the draft was that he wasn't going to fall any farther than 7, and that came true. So the Pelicans could end the cycle of finding point guards with this young man, but everything needs to fall in place, and the Pelicans need a plan. The same is true for Derik Queen. The comparisons for Derik Queen are kind of all over the place. There have been comparisons to Alperen Sengun. There have been comparisons to Julius Randle and Naz Reid. The Naz Reid ones don't make sense to me because Naz Reid is a better athlete. You put the two of them together, and which one is the better athlete? And Naz Reid was a better perimeter player and is a better perimeter player than Derik Queen is now. And I don't get those comparisons. Julius Randle, I get. Alperen Sengun, to a degree, I get. And there's no questioning his skill. The other guy that I have tended to compare Queen to is Jahlil Okafor. Though I think Queen is a better rebounder than Jahlil. But they're both highly skilled big men, though I think Queen, and this was pointed out on last night's draft show with the rest of the crew, that Queen is much more of a face-up guy than Jahlil was. And Jahlil, but they both need to expand their games. Both come into the league needing to expand their games, but were high usage offensive players who were really effective in college in their 1 year in college. And for Queen, he can create shots, he can put the ball on the floor, and he can score and pass out of the post. But you're not getting a high-level athlete here. You're not getting a guy who gives you tremendous length and defensive ability. You're not getting a guy who has shown at this stage a real dedication to his physical fitness, which is kind of a concern. And I don't think what you've drafted is a center. Again, I think that for Derik Queen, his most effective position is going to be as a power forward. That could be a faster path for him to the starting lineup, certainly as well. If Zion Williamson is playing the 3, if the Pelicans do make a move on the perimeter to free up And unfortunately, that would be Herb Jones. But if they do make that move, that's your fastest path for Queen to get in the starting lineup, moving Zion to the 3 and playing Trey as a giant 2 and putting Jordan Poole in position as your point. But again, that pushes Fears to the bench. So if you're going to have units with Fears and Queen, then you're talking about probably the most likely is you got to put shooting around those two. So if you're playing a lineup with Fears and Queen together, then you likely have to have Trey at the 3. You likely have to have Jordan Poole at the 2. And you need to have a center in that mix who can really rebound and defend, which again, you can do that with Yves Missi, but I don't know if he's the exact fit for that group. The Pelicans got their guy, and you have to give them credit for that. They identified the 2 players in this draft that they wanted, and they walked away with both of them. But Queen is the bigger question mark, even with his level of skill. You need, again, to find a way to maximize both of these young men early. The big thing for Derik Queen is going to be pushing him to get his physical fitness into gear. He needs to come in ready to play for Summer League. He needs to see very quickly what it takes to be an NBA player. I would hope that both of those guys are already, that Joe Dumars has already started to communicate with them about what they need to do. I know that they aren't signed yet, obviously, but there needs if you were either one of those young men and you're looking at where the situation you're coming into, I think you need to be talking to Willie Green and you need to be talking to Joe Dumars immediately about what you need to do as far as NBA preparedness goes. Personal trainers can only do so much. They can do your skill development and those types of things, though I wish there were less of those independent basketball coaches around. But you really need to be in the weight room with the strength and conditioning team and working on NBA types of drills to get stronger, to get more flexible, to get more explosive, particularly Derik Queen. He has to be more explosive because he's going to get a lot of opportunities to finish on the offensive glass. He's going to get a lot of opportunities in the dunker spot. He's going to get a lot of opportunities in pick and roll, you would hope. You would hope. But in those situations, that's where he has to thrive early on. And so that explosiveness, that ability to get that quick second jump, that ability to match the strength inside of NBA players, and that ability to move and recover defensively, that's what he has to get better at. And I think the curve for him is probably, as long as it is for Fears, though height always allows you to make a few more mistakes. When you're small and you make defensive mistakes, it's hard to recover. When you're a post player, and we saw with Yves as he struggled early on and struggled at some points in the year, but he was able to be impactful in other ways. Obviously, on the offensive glass, in transition, he was able to run the floor effectively. He got a lot of second chance buckets that way. So I think that you got to find your way to fit in and do the little things. It's like the idea in football that if you're going to make the team, you got to kind of make it on special teams as a rookie. You got to be able to show your versatility. I think that's the same if you're trying to fight your way into a rotation on a team that has pieces where you were already in place. You have a hierarchy of some sort already on this team with 3 veterans who can score the basketball in Zion, Trey, and Jordan Poole. And you also have a Herb Jones as a connector who is going to be a big part of whatever this team does as long as he's on the roster. So, I think for Queen, the price you paid for him, again, is going to always be attached to him as well. That's a burden for him too. He's going to hear the comments about should the team have taken him. He's going to hear with every game that he struggles, and he's a rookie, so he will have struggle nights, but he's going to hear that he was not the best option for the New Orleans Pelicans. To be honest, and I've said this, so I don't feel bad in saying it, he wasn't my choice. He wasn't my favorite choice. I think that there are, he's not as big a concern for me as like an Ace Bailey was, but I worry at that position at 13 about his overall value. He can prove all of us wrong. He can prove those who believed in him the most. He can prove them exactly right. And I think that it's that I'd like to see that. Ultimately, you want these players to succeed. It's no fun covering a bad team. It's no fun to cover a struggling team. So I want these players to succeed. It's just that it's so hard when you think about the Pelicans, to imagine them really developing a young player, because when has it happened when the player didn't do the lion's share of their work alone? Herb Jones came in ready to work. Trey Murphy came in ready to work off of what he did in Virginia. Jose Alvarado came in mature and ready to work. Najee Marshall came in mature and ready to work. It wasn't the Pelicans that made them into players. It's their own individual work. And that's the case in the NBA most often, is that you've got to improve each offseason on your own and get better, but your team needs to have a plan. They need to have a system of development for you and a structure to where they know where you should be at the end of year one, the end of year two, the end of year three, when they're ready to evaluate you for contract extensions. And that remains to be seen with the New Orleans Pelicans. As we look ahead to round two, let's start with the position of need and the best available centers still on the board. Maxime Reynaud, the Frenchman, but who kind of didn't commit to basketball till his senior year. But at Stanford became one of the best 7-footers in the country. He can space the floor, very skilled, rebounds well, but is not a great defensive player. Again, doesn't have the same kind of explosiveness athletically that you'd like. He does work hard. He does play hard. He is a stretch big, which certainly the Pelicans can use. They can use that. But again, he does not improve you defensively. So it kind of feels like right now the Pelicans are going all in on being a running team, because they still need a little bit more shooting. But with this current roster, and even if you add a couple of defenders on the post, this team is suited and best and going to be its best in transition. But the hard thing is, if you're going to play fast, you have to be able to get defensive rebounds, and you have to be able to generate turnovers. You have to be able to do both of those things. The rebounding is still a major issue for this team, because you look at this, who are your best plus rebounders? And on the defensive end, you don't really have those. So that's going to be a struggle. The next guy who could be in position is Ryan Kalkbrenner. Kalkbrenner, another guy who played a number of years in college at Creighton, good out of the pick and roll, can protect the rim, is more of a backup with his skill set. 7'6" wingspan, but again, not a great athlete. The athletes at the center position are likely gone at this stage. These are guys who can offensively do things, but you don't need any more offense in the post right now. What you need is defense, and you've got to find somebody impactful in that. There aren't any of those players kind of remaining on the board, but those are the two best centers. Another kind of dark horse would be Eric Dixon, who is primarily a power forward, but he's a guy who led the nation in scoring last year in his 6th year as a senior, but not a great wingspan, not a great athlete, and not great defense. It's a struggle now to find someone in this draft who's going to impact the post defensively. The other guy, again, that is one of my favorites, who doesn't help you in the post, but I think is the best long-term fit for the Pelicans and fulfills a different need, is Sion James. If Herb Jones ultimately becomes the asset that the Pelicans have to trade, while I don't believe that Herb will be traded by the start of the season, because I think, again, and I said this last night, that Joe Dumars wants to see the trio of Zion, Trey, and Herb together. The numbers, and these are guys who have looked in the numbers, and if you look at the time that they've played together, that group has always done well when it's been on the floor together. And I think if Joe Dumars says, by saying you're committed to Zion, then you have to be committed to the people who make Zion his best. So I think he's going to look at that. But if you're looking for a Herb Jones replacement eventually, Sion James is that guy in my mind. Steady ball handler, unselfish player, defensive versatility, opportunistic scorer, physically imposing, supreme athleticism. His weaknesses aren't a problem for this team. He's not a volume scorer, but he improved his shooting all 5 years that he was in college. He's not going to take a bunch of shots, but as a primary defender, and if he builds his confidence, he can be a Herb Jones type at 6'6", very strong, not a super wingspan, but able to hold his position against anyone defensively, and a perfect team player and role player for a team looking for more of those types. If Sadiq Bey doesn't work out for whatever reason, if you're looking for that Herb Jones type, if you're looking for that guy who can come in and be an imposing defender who's not going to shake up the locker room and be a problem, but is more likely to bring people together, then I think Sion James is the pick. We'll see what happens. All right, that's going to do it for today. Obviously, we've covered a number of topics, plenty to talk about. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell so you always get the great content we have here on Boot Crew Media. Please go ahead and do that. Also, check out thebirdrights.com for me. Go ahead and look at that. See, I'll have some new materials up very quickly on that site after the draft is completed. We'll get into a recap there as well. And make sure you follow me on social media, DM Grubb on Twitter and on Instagram. And you can also find me on Blue Sky and TikTok as well. There'll be more live shows coming up throughout the weekend and after round 2 of the draft. So tune in for those. And I just want to, on behalf of all the guys, just reiterate our thanks for last night. It was a long show, 3 hours that we were on live talking about the draft, and it was passionate at times. It was analytical at times. And I thank the audience, and all the guys do, I'm certain as well. I feel comfortable speaking for them in that regard, and just saying we are so grateful for the interactions. Thank you to Eves Misi for dropping into the chat last night as well. And just thank you for giving us a historic night with more than 10,000 viewers of that broadcast now in less than 24 hours. So it's just been an amazing couple of days, and we hope to continue. Well, we strive to continue to give you fantastic content and get better and better throughout this offseason and head into what will be a very exciting and interesting preseason, summer camp, training camp, summer league, all of those things as we move forward with the New Orleans Pelicans. Until the next time, this has been David Grubb on the Post Up right here on Boot Crew Media. Y'all have a great weekend.